Well, it is that time again, everybody. Hope you are doing well. My name is BirdDog John, and I am back in action.
In those scenarios,
Yep.
it's good to neuralize the cameras. You guys know that best.
Very straightforward. Plug it in, go to the web UI, link the source, walk away. Like super simple. I keep looking over at the chat, and I keep seeing you are full of it. Tasty, spicy meat snacks. Covered in flavor. I mean, you can't go wrong. So what's going on? We've got a handful of folks here in the chat, and I really appreciate that. What's up, mate? Hey, Warren, how are you? Appreciate it. Hey, Robbie, how's it going, man? We were just talking about you. What's going on, Tom? Ahoy. How is it going? What's going on, Go Web? Good to see you again. Thanks for hanging out with us again today. Appreciate that. Feel like I'm in this video more than anyone but John. It's true, NetApp. You are, I'm going to cut this up and put this in the next intro.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Dr. Nick.
What's going on, everybody? I am indeed BirdDog John. We're going to make sure that this is all working here correctly. Give me one quick second. I'm just going to check my audio. Looks like it's coming through on that side. So I will do my due diligence, go over to the YouTubes and check that out as well. All right, that audio is coming through there. It's not super loud, but we will we'll figure that out here just in a second. I'm also hearing an echo because I've got this thing open. Okay, so I think I'm in good shape. Now, having an issue with LinkedIn. For some reason, the LinkedIn services are not working correctly. And so if I go over there, I have stopped and started that stream more than once, and it is not streaming. So I'm not too sure what is going on there, but I will remove this stream, and then I will re-add it to LinkedIn, and let's see if that's going to work or not. It says you're live, but whether or not we actually are, who knows? Let's see if this event has started or not. The event will start soon. So no. So LinkedIn is having issues, which I'm glad that that's not my only platform because that would be super annoying. So I'm going to remove this. I will go over to LinkedIn and let everybody know that they're having issues. And let me just look. Where is it here? Here we go. So let's join this show, add a comment. LinkedIn is having issues. Join me over on birddogjohn.tv. Hopefully people see that, and that's okay. Now, jumping back over to, first of all, I just got like a notification. Okay, cool. Okay. Hey, how's it going? We are definitely in the throes of it here. This is the joys of live streaming and trying to figure it out as you go along. And I think this is one of those things that people like, is that this isn't super polished and I'm not like reading from a script and I don't have things, like for the most part, this is a pretty straightforward show. But I'm very much so doing this in real time. There's no safety net per se. We set up as many as we can to kind of catch this stuff, but as I was launching the show today, I had those issues, and so there you go. We're learning, and LinkedIn is not going to play nice today. The other thing is that, as always, we have our trusty dusty heat map, and so if you would be so kind as to scan this little QR code with your device, it'll bring up a very generic Google form. And on there, it'll say, what country are you in? What is the closest city to you? And if you type those in, this is what the Google form looks like. Oh, you can't even see that. This is what the form looks like. And if you type that in and put your info in there, you will appear on my heat map, which is, let me jump into vMix now. So that is over here. And so the people are starting to check in. That's really cool. This is just a cool little thing. We kind of see where everybody's hailing from. And so if you fill out that simple little form, your dot will appear on this screen, and we'll check in on this during the course of the show. But it's something that we do every show to kind of see where things are going. Now, we got somebody in Ontario. Is that right? What city are you in? Toronto. Oh, very cool. My hometown. So cheers to you for checking in Toronto. Glad to hear it. Welcome aboard. The place to be for this show. Now, I stream this to Facebook. I stream it to YouTube. I stream it to Twitch and to Twitter. But the place to really find all of these updates and all this stuff that we do on this show is at BirdDogJohn.tv. So if you are unaware of that, and I know that there's been a little bit of chatter and traffic about this show because we're going to talk about Multicast today. And that is one of those, for many of us, it's one of those like unknown things that we have on our radar, but we are not super versed in. And so I'm going to go over Multicast basics. We're going to talk about what it is, how it kind of works in a workflow for NDI, and then I'm going to show you actually how to set it up. Now, I can just pick one of my cameras, I guess, here, but many of these cameras are already functioning in Multicast because, pro tip, I'm running a Multicast network here in the studio, and so that is how that works. This is it actually working. The show is functioning on Multicast. So that's pretty cool that I can practice what I preach a little bit and do that in real time for you guys to see. So this is the real result. What's going on, NetHab? Whatever you do, please don't stop believing. Alrighty. There should be should have a button with just that little one phrase from the song just to play for you, but alas, I do not. So like I said, today's show, the topic is about Multicast. We do a little ramp up here where we spend 10 or 15 minutes just kind of chatting, making sure that people don't have any kind of urgent, outstanding support questions that they may need covered. This is one of the official support channels with BirdDog and official, unofficial, because I don't know how much promotion we do of this other than just word of mouth and me posting stuff on, inside our channels over on Facebook and whatever. But today I went one step further and invited people from the NDI video group into this conversation for this show. And so we'll see if anybody comes over from there and has their own impressions as to how to do things. As you all know, now this is the third part of a series of videos that I've talked about different networking styles. The first one, we talked about static networks and how you can do NDI on there. I genuinely believe in the depths of my being that there are better ways to configure your network, not only for your customers, but for you and for your integrators and all of that. There's a better way to do it when we're dealing with NDI. The tendency is to think that all AV over IP is the same configuration. And for the past 4 years, I've been telling you it's not. Okay? Different protocols require different things. And so, yes, I think there is a better way to do NDI if you're just talking about network configurations and how to actually do it, there's a better way to do it than just your static IP unmanaged network. That works for low-level, low-data, audio networks. Dante is notorious for that, where you can get away with it. But that really is not the best way to handle high amounts of data. And a great example of this would be, the SMPTE 2110 expectations of networking. That's like AV. That's video over IP on steroids in terms of what it requires compared to NDI, for example. And so, yes, there are still NDI is less network of a network hog when it comes to what's required for NDI to function on your network, but it doesn't mean there are no rules or no best practices. And so that's what we're doing here. We're talking about those things. And the first video I did, I think it was like a week or so ago, I talked about static networks. That's part one. And I go through how to actually do it. Because one of the frustrations is people say, oh, well, it can be done any way you want. It's like, but they don't show how. And so forget that. I'm going to show you how to actually do it, okay? So on static, I actually talk you through it, and I tell you what's required to make static stuff work. And we had a ticket in today of a guy who actually, just a conversation, the ticket's been in for a couple of days, about like, this is how I've set up my network. Why are these things required? Because it's not required for any other functions in the static world. And again, if you're referring to Dante, actually there is a Dante controller. That's some things that are required in order to direct the traffic. So same thing with NDI. And with the static conversation, obviously many of you know where I'm going with this. The big piece is Discovery Server, right? So Discovery Server is kind of the traffic cop when it comes to who's coming and going and who's alive on the network. The temptation with network devices is to think of them like they are computers. Like they have the processing power and the network abilities of PCs or Macs or whatever. And they don't. They're network nodes. They're just things on networks that are just doing their thing on the network, but they're not navigating the network. They're certainly not doing any sort of high process oriented network navigation. They're just nodes. They're just sitting out there at an IP address. And so it really is up to your network to get that information across. And so if you're looking for ease of use, usability, all that sort of good stuff, static is fine, but you need to have Discovery Server. And then part 2 of this series has been DHCP, which is the better of the two options when it comes to deciding between them. And the pushback that we get on the DHCP conversation traditionally is, yeah, but I don't want to confuse my customer with the DHCP stuff. And, it seems overkill for what I want to do. I just want to put a camera on a network with a computer. It's like, okay, well, yes, but I would still strongly recommend that you use DHCP DHCP or Discovery Server. And there are many reasons for that. Several things that are under the hood reasons for that, we don't necessarily get into, but for performance sake, they're night and day. And so you really do need to have some sort of reputable router that can handle DHCP and that can handle routing tables and MDNS and all that sort of good stuff. And if you don't know what any of those terms are, just use a DHCP network. If you don't know what those terms are, please use a DHCP network because you're going to get lost really fast. Or you can go and you can look at my conversations about that now. So part 2 is an in-depth conversation about DHCP and why we gravitate towards that for small NDI networks. And somebody commented on that video, which is kind of where this part 3 came about Multicast, because they said, it'd be great to have kind of a general overview as to understanding what Multicast is and how to do that inside of a NDI environment. And so my NDI environment is the Netgear AV over IP M4250 series. And Tuesday, we had a show about the big announcement at Infocom. Netgear made an announcement of the 4350s. And so if you don't know what that is, those are essentially mid to large corporate size switching capabilities and routing and all that layer 2, layer 3. And it is for large data. So we're talking up to 100 gig backbone on some of these switches. So massive backplanes, massive abilities to process huge amounts of data. And I would love to get my hands on one of these and see what it can do, because that is kind of the only thing that I get a little nervous about with the 4250 line, which is the prosumer line, which is, I think now that the 4350s are out, I think it's the small to mid-level installation. That's what the 4250 is for. It's a 1 gig backplane with 10 gig SFP pluses, right? And you can trunk those together to make them 20s or 40s or however many you have. But that's the idea, is it's this backplane of 10 gigs, essentially. Now we're talking with the 4350s, 100 gig backbones, which is massive. Totally different, even a different SFP class. So that's really neat to see that integrated. And it's a merriment to those massive backbone, the 4300 switches, which are those big, large corporate size AV installation stuff. So I'm thinking like installers, big, even things like large church organizations, guys that are doing big, massive installs and complete overhauls of sanctuaries and lecture rooms and schools. The 4350 line, 4300 line with the 4350s as the endpoint switches is kind of the natural thing to go. So I think that's pretty I think it's pretty cool that that's the way that the industry is going. I'm really excited for Netgear. I really hope that they will be able to deliver on the things that they've announced at InfoComm, because if they do, that is a complete line. I mean, as of today, that's a complete line of switching material that is now in the wild, and they've definitely created the standard across the industry as to challenging people to come at them with, a level of AV integration. So it's really neat. I'm very excited. So today we're gonna cover multicast, do a few things. I'm gonna burn through the chat real bit. Hold on to that feeling. What's going on, Balu? Welcome to the show. Hey, Angus. Good morning. Welcome. I see that you have appeared on the map. We can cut over to that again. We've got some check-ins here on the map. So mostly North America right now. Actually, all North America. So the little QR code at the top of my screen would take you to a little simple Google form. I don't collect your email or anything like that. It's just what country are you in, what city are you closest to, and if you fill out that form and hit submit, your dot will appear on this map. So that's what the heat map is all about. That's what this QR code is all about, to get people going on there. NetHab, what are the chances that someone from Netgear could come on and talk about the 4350? Pretty high, actually, because I have a good professional relationship with John Hinkle, who is one of the major guys from Netgear, and he was at InfoComm and helping make that announcement or whatever. So John would probably come on, and the engineer that they had there at the show too, I could probably talk him into coming on. So yeah, we're good friends with them. So good stuff. What's going on, Truthman? Hey there. Hey, what's going on? Thanks for stopping by the show. I really appreciate that. And of course, Go Web. Greetings from India. Glad to have you on board. Now, I have invited a couple of guys to join me, and I just said whenever they're available. So I don't know when they would show up, but the first to show is BirdDog Jake, and so I'm going to bring him on. What's going on, man?
Hey, what's going on, John?
I'm doing all right. Not too much today. We're going to go over multicast. Thanks for joining me on this conversation, because
of course,
this is one of those things that is like the most asked. One of the most asked networking unknowns out there, right? People are curious about it, but they're a little intimidated to implement it, and so
right.
we want to.
Well, I'm glad we're having this conversation today. I think it's really important for networks and designs and AV installations to be looking at multicast and the options that we have for these transmission protocols on our devices. It's really fantastic that we even have this ability to even have this conversation. So I love it.
Yeah, I'm excited that we're getting to the place in the industry where this stuff is becoming more common, because people are catching on with the NDI feel, and then they're wanting to do a whole lot more with it. And when you get, I'll go over this in kind of the short, brief course that we'll talk about it, but when you get to doing multiple destinations, when you're having lots of sources going to multiple destinations, then, multicast really becomes the way of doing that. It's a
conversation to consider.
Yeah, and it really is a part of if you're looking for consistency across performance when you're talking about multiple destinations, and the introduction of inexpensive NDI decoders, for example, is going to propel this conversation into that world. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. Cool. Well, thanks for coming along. I really appreciate it. If anybody has questions for Jake, feel free.
Shoot them my way throughout the show. Happy to answer anything that comes through. But no, I'm really excited about this show that we have going on, because multicast, as you know from being an IT professional, that it's not new. It's been around for a while. It's how networks are managed from IT administrators and everything. And it's just incredibly advantageous, the power that it brings to our whole AV world and for distributing those sources. So now that we have NDI floating all around, the question becomes, well, why don't we distribute this even more places, right? And how do we do that, and what's the procedure?
Yeah, there's... What's interesting to me, I'm not on the integration. I kind of am in terms of the... the guys have questions about integrating, but when it comes to actually deciding how to implement, that kind of happens at the sales side of things, where it's can we do this? And those questions kind of get answered at that level. And so you've been at the forefront of probably more of those conversations than I have. But people do come back to us and they're like, hey, like we've loved running with NDI with BirdDog stuff, and now we've gotten approval to kind of take it, like to put it on steroids. And so what should we be aware of? And I had a couple
those
of
conversations start.
Yeah, I've had a couple of conversations with guys. There were a couple of groups that came to us at NAB 2022, and they were like, "We've got the budget, we have the space, we're starting like the studio's being constructed, and we want to do NDI all the way through." And so all of their screens and all of their cameras and all of their stuff was basically an NDI workflow, because they're doing like rentable. The guys that I'm thinking about I think they were in Florida. They were, or Florida or Texas, I can't remember. But anyways, they were doing rentable spaces where people could come in, pay a fee, and basically have a studio for an afternoon and do whatever it is that they wanted to record.
Someone was just talking about that on our user group yesterday. They said, hey, I got a bunch of P400s and some 200s, and I have a studio space. What do I do with it? Well, rent it out, put on corporate events, have, that space is a big thing, and especially if it's all IT and network configured and up to the latest and greatest technology, you're absolutely going to have people come in and be able to produce events. So,
yeah, that was an interesting, like, and it was just an interesting concept, because they were like, we wanted to, like, they had their own production stuff, so they were going to use it for stuff, but then when it wasn't being used, they were going to rent it out and like make it available. But they were really interested in, we don't want the network to be the problem, right? So how do we do this? And so it was even a discussion about how do you design the network, and they were starting small but eventually going larger. And so I said, to kick off, just here's the DHCP setup that I kind of, have been known to recommend. But then if you're going to expand that and it's going to become much bigger, then we're talking multicast. And at the time, the 4250s were the ones that were able. They had just launched a little 8-porter desktop unit, and so that conversation was very much so, at the forefront. And to Netgear's credit, they've made it to where it's pretty easy to click about a half a dozen buttons and you're up and running.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We love those things.
So cool stuff. Well, let me catch up in the chat here. I've recently made a multi-gig 2.55 10 gig switches an obsession.
Nice.
That's always good. I like that idea.
That is always good.
I've been tempted to pull my Unify gear out of my network and just go 4250 all the way
across.
Because the Engage software, the topography stuff doesn't work if you're going into a third party. It does. I mean, they show on the network, but they don't show how they're connected.
Because I just got Insight all hooked up with my Netgear WAP that I have, but I'm using a Unify Ubiquity Dream Machine as my router and network.
So I'd probably leave the gateway that I don't need to replace, but the switching infrastructure, I want it all to talk together. Awesome. And so that is, I've got two 16 switches that are running, so I need to get at least a 24, because one of the 16s isn't loaded, and then do a fiber core swap out, because I have a fiber core Unify thing. But I know some guys,
I don't know how, but I'm already running out of ports on my Switch. It's kind of ridiculous.
It that happens faster than you think it does.
Yeah.
Angus says, hey, Jake.
Hey, Angus. What's going on, man?
Good morning from smoky West Michigan. Yes, indeed it is. The wildfires of Canada are smoking us out in the state. It has been very odd, to say the least. But it's a rainy day. Let me see. Yeah, Auburn Hills, it's kind of an overcast day. Tomorrow's supposed to be sunny, so we'll see how that... Sunny and like 86, so I'm sure they won't let us out of our houses. But so Jake is into place. I have several comments from this new YouTube person who's joined us here. Hey, Jake, good to see you on the show.
Hey,
what's going on, Tom? So Rent a Studio is super cool, but it needs to be all integrated so that anyone with NDI knowledge simply gets in there, loads their link
it
to
depends.
the cans.
I have one client of ours that has a one-button push recording studio that's all powered by NDI. Essentially, you just go up to the podium, you bring your USB stick with your PowerPoints, and you just press record. He has everything all set up. The microphone's there. It's a PF120 inside of, it has a ring light and his green screen behind him. And all you do is just you rent the studio out, and when you need to record your content, you just pop right in. So the end user has no idea that what's going on for the NDI backbone and the technology used. All they know is that they can press that big red button for record and then pull out that USB stick and be done. So there's a lot of really cool rent a studio or spaces and facilities that can really be built with all this technology if you just pick the right parts, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there's a big, again, you don't have to be like NDI Pro to be able to set up like a turnkey solution for somebody to just like come in and rent it. And so that's kind of the luxury of it, is because behind the scenes, you know how sophisticated it is, but on the surface, it just looks like it's functioning, you know? And so anyways, it'd be interesting to kind of think that through a little bit to see how to like actually issue. Because with the API commands and stuff, you could totally do this with even a Stream Deck and stuff like that, right?
Absolutely.
That would be.
Yeah, you know how much
easy.
we love Stream Deck.
Yeah.
I just downloaded Companion 3 for the latest beta for that, so that's been really exciting.
What's new on the Companion 3 front?
So, sidebar. Well, kind of, it's a little bit related. So Dante, which I'm also running Multicast on my network, which we'll jump in and talk about today. I just set up their Dante domain manager, which allows for like API switching. So now I have API switching of my Dante sources on a Stream Deck. So
nice.
It was a little cumbersome to set up, right? You got to spin up VMs, you got to assign all your devices. My VM ended up breaking, and I had to re-find all my devices yesterday, so it ended up being a whole networking thing. But, I mean, it's really sweet to be able to have the Stream Deck switch those sources. We already have that with Central, right?
Yeah.
With the Central router, it's already API in there. So it's effectively the same thing. So I wanted to see which or how both of them handle, right?
Yep. That's cool.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that out because I'm pretty sure I'm not on that version, but that's all good.
There are a
also
couple things that changed inside the UI of Companion.
Oh, really?
For button presses and stuff. Like, I'm still getting used to it.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't even like looked at it, so I'll have to check that out and see what updates there are. Just gonna say, the 4250 with the AV UIs are so easy to use. There's really no need to go to the old admin anymore. There's still the old school interface if you really want to go in there and play around like olden days. But yes, the UI, super helpful. Does anybody know if they fixed the reservation list bug that was like a year ago, where if you set your DHCP reservation list on the 4250s and then you make a change on the web UI, on the AV web UI, it erases the whole list? Because
I think they may have fixed that.
Okay, good.
I haven't checked because I was in the regular interface yesterday to set up like ACLs and a bunch of other things. Right. And whenever I would change VLAN stuff, it would reflect on the AV interface. So I hope that they fixed it with reservations, but I don't know.
Nice. Okay. Well, okay. Maybe I'll have to just experiment with it and confirm, because that is going to end up being a bit of an issue. But okay. So here's what I want to do. I'll walk through the basics of multicast, and we'll spend a little time talking about that, and then I'll bring Jake into the conversation about integrating multicast with NDI, and then and like what are the advantages and things to look out for there. And then we can actually look at a few examples. So Jake is running a multicast network. This studio is functioning on a multicast network. And we can talk about this in relation to how it also interacts with Dante, because you have Dante sources on your network, right?
I do.
Okay, so
I have Dante running in multicast on the same VLAN as NDI, so we'll get into it deep.
Yeah, then we definitely need to have that discussion about how that was to set up and how that seems to go, how that seems to like work together. And before I do that, so this little QR code that's at the top of Jake's screen at this point is for a heat map that I have going on. And so I will show that to you what we're up to here. So this little heat map is basically where all of you guys are checking in from. So if you scan that QR code, it'll ask you, I don't collect emails or anything. It just, what country are you in? What's the closest city to you? And it'll put a little pin on that heat map. So feel free to do that for another minute or two, and then I'm going to set up. I went in and I made notes for this one. The other ones I didn't necessarily do too much of that with, but with Multicast, there's just there are certain things that I want to be sure that I say correctly because it is kind of it's a concept in networking that's once you get it, then you can see why it's super advantageous. But it does take a fair bit of customization. And as a note here, every router, switching company, whatever you want to call it, they all do their setup a little bit differently. Okay, so if you're operating in a Cisco environment, you're operating in a Unify environment. If you're on a 4250 Netgear environment, if you're on the 4300 series, they're all just a little bit different. And so you have to. This conversation is more about what Multicast is when it's up and running, but it is not a tutorial on how to turn it on for your specific network infrastructure, which is why network administrators, traditionally stick to a brand of switch. They don't like hodgepodge things together because they don't necessarily talk seamlessly together. And so if you're thinking about upgrading a system, the issue becomes, it gets a little expensive because you're probably talking about taking everything out and putting in all the same so they all talk together, which goes back to my comment about why I want to delete those two Unify switches out of my system, because although it's super handy, some of the web interfaces that Unify has, it's super handy to have, all of the devices listed with all their MDNS names and all that information. It's also a bit of a challenge because the switches don't talk to the Netgear ones and pass that information where it shows me the topography information. It shows me how things are connected. They're basically just all sitting out in islands all on their own.
Yes.
So that's not helpful. And if I'm going to be talking to people about integrating AV line switches and using the 4250s as an example, I should probably have them all talking together as they're supposed to be. So we will see how that conversation goes along.
That'll be a fun upgrade for the studio, John.
Well, yeah, it will. And I'd be actually curious to know if I see performance changes, mostly because I probably will use one of the 16-port Unifies as for the phone system and the the computers and stuff that don't really need to be on the 4250s necessarily, but all the BirdDogs, the studio itself, some of the stuff is very much so heavy related on it all being on the same stuff, because I do want it to populate correctly, and I do want to be able to use that as a tangible example as to if you invest in your network and you buy an AV line pro level switch or even semi-pro, then that you hear the advantages. So there you go. And let me jump here, just tidy up the chat before we go into this. I keep my reservations as a copy and paste script, and it's just I can just fire into the command line to the switch. That's
awesome.
It's using your Noodle Angus. Good morning. Another beautiful topic. Yeah, Laura, you've been really excited about these networking conversations and about the 4350 one that we did on Tuesday. So you've been all amped up.
Yeah, well,
we've Dante and NDI running on the same VLAN as each other in a converged network. It works
awesome,
perfectly.
Tom. Great to hear it, because mine's working perfectly too, and has been for a really long time.
Good switches remove bottlenecks. They're using Cisco Catalyst. And the thing about the Catalyst line is I know guys that are doing, actually you might be one of them, I know guys that are using that Cisco brand, and they have it all the way throughout their fleet. There are a couple that I know are heavily used in federally funded U.S. school systems, the 2960 series, actually, and they are discontinued, but they've never been upgraded because the federal government never re-upped the infrastructure upgrade plan. And so long ago, when the 2960 series was like the bee's knees, they bought all of these Cisco switches and put them in all of these public schools across the U.S., but then they never redid it after the Cisco switch after Cisco discontinued that series.
Right.
And there are real problems with the 2960 series when it comes to PoE delegation and operating at 10100 over 1 gig. Mm-hmm. So we have put that switch on the no-no list, which has been a bit of a problem because there's these federally funded schools that have them everywhere throughout their infrastructure. At least that was how it was 3 years ago. I know that number has stayed on the list since. So. Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Well, any final thoughts before I jump into this overview, Jake?
No, I think it's time. I think this is going to be a good, exciting one.
Cool. All right. Well, I will. We'll see you in a couple of minutes after I'm done my little speech. So we'll go from there. Okay. So today's topic is about multicast, and before I do that, I'm going to hit my record button in vMix. So today's topic is about multicast, and this is one of those conversations that I didn't actually record it. Let's try this one more time. What is going on here? Uh-oh, something's up. It's not going to let me record. Oh, I love that. Love it when the record button just flat out doesn't work. Okay, so we're going to have to rip this off of YouTube. Oh, and now it wants to work? And now it's working? Okay, now it's working. I have no idea what's going on here. Today's topic is going to be about multicast, and this is one of those things that is one of those like unknowns, like a lot of people who are getting into the networking realm because of NDI, they hear the word, but they don't really know what's all entailed. And so today, with the help of Jake and a few other things, we're going to talk about what multicast is generally, and then we're going to talk about how it behaves with NDI, but then also tangibly, I'll use one of my own cameras, and we'll talk about how to actually set that up and use a multicast configuration for a BirdDog product and what that actually looks like. So I want to be sure that we're spending a little bit of time, but I also want to be absolutely sure that you kind of have a general idea as to what it is and why it plays a role in large NDI rollouts. Now, as a kind of a bookend conversation here, we've already talked about two styles of networking. We talked about in part 1, which is available on the BirdDogJohn.tv YouTube page. We've talked about static networks and how to actually do it. Okay, they're not my favorite. I think we all know that. But static networks is a way that you can actually get NDI up and running fairly quickly. There are some things, some gotchas or some catches that you need to consider. And in particular, you need to know what discovery server is and how to implement it. So if you're doing static, you probably need to, you need to run a discovery server so that you have consistent performance across the fleet. Now, if that option is off the table and you need this to function without exterior services running, then you're automatically already talking about DHCP, which was part 2 of this series, where we talked about DHCP services, how they work, why you want them, what MDNS is, what routing tables are, and how to kind of configure all of that. So we go through that. We talk about why DHCP services are how we feel they're superior in many regards and why you might want to use that instead of a static, especially if you're starting from scratch. There are it's basically you learn one or the other, and I would strongly recommend for NDI purposes, you learn how to implement DHCP, and they make it super easy on the Netgear 4250 line. And so if you're getting into NDI and you're getting into AV over IP, you're going to probably be looking at the 4350 line anyways, because the 4250 line, because those are the small to mid-size NDI installation options. And if you're looking to do something on a large scale, the brand new announced 4350 line is the same interface, but it's a very strong backplane for data to be processed. And so you want to, if you're serious about doing video over IP, you're probably looking at AV over IP switches to begin with, and Netgear is clearly out in front in many of those regards. So the third element to this, part 3, is really about multicast and what is it and how does it work. Multicast answers the question about what to do when we're sending one endpoint to multiple destinations, okay? Because in the NDI realm, when you make a connection in the unicast world, okay, so TCP or RUDP or UDP, you're making a connection between a BirdDog camera and a BirdDog decoder, let's just keep it straightforward and simple, that full NDI stream is going to be running, for HD, is going to be running somewhere in the ballpark of 140 megs. And so you're taking 140 megs and you're subscribing to that stream. Okay, so our camera's on the network. It is doing its thing, but nobody's subscribed to that camera. You're taking that and subscribing to that stream, and the network is going to make the connection between the camera and the endpoint, the decoder, and it's going to start streaming 140 megs. Well, that's all well and good, except what if I open Studio Monitor on a computer as well? Okay, well, now we're going to send it from the BirdDog camera to the decoder, flex out, but then we're also going to subscribe to that stream from the camera to Studio Monitor. And then what if in Studio Monitor, I'm like, okay, now I need to open vMix. And so I open a program like vMix, which subscribes to the cameras again. And so we've 140 megs going to the flex out. We've got 140 megs going to the Studio Monitor. And now we've got 140 megs also coming in for vMix. Well, that's starting to pile up, right? Multicast answers that problem because Multicast puts the onus of the subscription on the network, meaning that the packets, once they enter the network, do not stack on top of each other, but instead are only replicated at the point of subscription, meaning that the decoder, the flex out in this instance, the flex out asks the network to subscribe to that multicast stream, and that multicast stream is only then replicated at the endpoint, meaning the data's on the network in 140 megs, but it's not sending 140 plus 140 plus 140. It's just 140. Okay, so we only have 140 megs per HD full NDI stream on the actual network, and we're not duplicating. We're not causing it to go to 280 and 360 and so on and so on. It's just going to be 140 megs, which means that now I can set up not one decoder, but 10 decoders, and it's only going to cost my network 140 megs. It's only going to have to process 140 megs per subscription. So Unicast puts the onus on the actual endpoint to subscribe and makes the endpoint and the actual encoder get that stream going. And in smaller networks, okay, if you're new to networking, 300, 400, 500 megs of constant throughput is pretty much all mid-size switches can do. All right, so we need to understand that although the marketing says that my 24-port 1 gig switch says that it has a backplane of 24 gigs, all that is the peak performance of every single port on that switch put into a calculator, and they typed in 24 times 1 gig, and it came out 24 gigs. That's what the marketing team did, okay? But what they didn't tell you is how much data the actual silicone can process. And that's different, okay? So there's usually an onboard processor, there's usually onboard memory, there's usually onboard, various things, but there's a packet buffer and a few other things that are actually functioning on the switch. How much data can this switch actually process at once? Because once we hit that threshold, that's going to start dumping packets into the packet buffer, and that buffer will never empty because it'll never be able to catch up. And eventually, what will happen, right? You all know this story. The buffer gets full, it dumps all the data, and you see a drop frame, or you see a skip in your video. All of your video skips, or some of them skip, or some of them jitter, or whatever you want to call it, but you see something that would be undesirable in a live video situation. So Multicast fixes that issue because it basically doesn't overload the switch because it's doing multiple subscriptions. You can load the switch up with encoders, with NDI signals, and then send them across to multiple destinations. Now, again, in a practical sense, how many decoders are we talking about here? Well, this becomes more of a problem when we start dealing with inexpensive decoders like the BirdDog Play or Flex Out or Mini, where these units are functioning in decode mode and they are showing this on televisions in hallways from a conference center, or they're sending this signal to multiple places around campus. that's when multicast really shines, because now, again, it's only 140 megs per HD stream. So when do you start talking about multicast? Well, when you're probably receiving a single source more than 4 or 5 times. Because if you get to 5 times 140 is not a small number. And more than likely, your mid-level switches are probably not going to be able to handle that amount of data, especially if on a consistent, long-term installation. If you were firing this up and you were running this over a short term, you're just doing something fast, you probably get away with it. All right. But if you're doing this and you're setting this up as an install for a client, or you're doing this on a bigger level, that is probably not going to work very well. So that's the concept of multicast with kind of NDI. Now, there are ways in the unicast realm to also achieve this goal, where you could do what's known as a broadcast, right? So the broadcast would do a broadcast style of packet transmission would also do this, would achieve this same goal. But with every device that's on the network, it would basically mean that the network has to handle every single one of those packets. And so that's that unicast idea, is the network has to handle every single packet and has to make sure that they all arrive to the destination intact and with enough overhead to process the next one coming. And again, when we're going to multiple destinations, multicast is really going to be that answer, because we want to be able to leverage the ability for the network to handle this data in a different way. All right. How does multicast actually do this? Okay. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of how it arrives at the switch level, okay, because it actually arrives with a multicast address to it, and when the device subscribes to it, there is the multicast address is not registered in the routing table. All right, this is all going to be kind of this is a little bit outside of where I wanted to go here, but that is not going to be registered to the routing table. And so what happens is the multicast address, okay, so the 4-octet address gets translated into basically a MAC address, and it gets then subscribed to from the decoder to the MAC address. So then the switch kind of understands what's going on. Now, there are a couple other concepts that I'm not going to get into, because there are various ways of configuring this, and this goes beyond what you need to actually understand when we're talking about 4250s and multicast. But the layer 2 level of it is IGMP. Okay, so you're going to hear that term thrown around a little bit. And IGMP is what enables, IGMP snooping in particular, is what enables the switch to learn the multicast MAC addresses of devices. Okay? So when you enable multicast on your network, you're going to hear, or you're going to see in the multicast guides, you need to enable IGMP snooping on the switches. This IGMP is a layer 2 function of the switch, whereas PIM, which is another, again, item that you probably don't need to know too much about here in this instance, but PIM is layer 3, and this is going to be at the switch router level. And PIM, depending on what you pick, again, you don't have to do this with 4250s. That's what we're going to talk about that. But depending on the style of PIM that you use, dense or otherwise, this will inform the switches of how to navigate the network. Okay, so how multicast packets actually navigate the network. So that's layer 3. So PIM is what you need to know for this conversation is PIM is layer 3, and PIM informs the network how the packets actually construct the pathways across the network, okay? And then IGMP and IGMP snooping is a layer 2 function, and that's happening and informing the switch who is who in the multicast realm, okay? That's what's going on. So you're going to see in the instructions, if you're not using a 4250 and you're asking, how do I set up multicast, the installers, BirdDog, all these sorts of guys are going to say you have to enable IGMP snooping on the switch, because that informs the switch who is who. It informs the routing table who is who in the multicast realm. Okay, so that's why that's a requirement. So router level is layer 3. Okay, switching level is layer 2. And so the IGMP thing is happening on the switch level, and PIM is happening on the router level, which is informing the router how to actually route the data. Okay. By default, this is important. By default, the MAC address doesn't exist on the actual routing table. So here's why you need to know this. When a multicast packet arrives, when a multicast request, subscription request comes to the switch is going to see the MAC address. And if IGMP snooping is not enabled on the switch, it's not going to know what to do with this MAC address. And it's not going to be registered to the routing table. And so what does it do? It doesn't dump it. It sends that information out every single port. So if IGMP snooping, for example, is not enabled on the switch, what it does is it sends the multicast information out every port, which defeats the purpose of multicast. Okay? It replicates all of it. And then it means that the endpoint, whatever it is, a VoIP phone, a computer, a BirdDog camera, a BirdDog decoder, whatever is on that port, it's up to that to discard that packet, which actually does take processing power, by the way. So it's up to the endpoint to discard the packet at the NIC level, at the actual interface of the computer to the network. So if IGMP snooping is not enabled, when that MAC address request arrives at the switch and the switch doesn't know who to give this to, it says, I'll just give it to everybody. And it shoots it out all of the ports. With IGMP snooping enabled on the switch starts to learn who's who, where, like what MAC addresses are associated with what devices. And then when the request comes in to subscribe to a multicast stream, the switch knows, oh, that guy's asking for this MAC address stream, and will make the connection and not send it out every port. And that is where the leverage of multicast starts to shine. Because not only does the switch understand where everything is, but then it's only sending that replicated packet of the 140 meg NDI stream out that one port. Okay, so it's highly efficient in terms of how it is that we actually structure our networks. But that's why IGMP snooping is so important on the switch level, on the layer 2 level. So that needs to be enabled in order for us to actually leverage the advantage of multicast. So when the destination sends in the subscription request, the switch is going to learn the actual MAC address of the device, of the stream, and then it can specifically tell you, or it can send that specific stream out that specific port. And that is why that's super important. Now, in the multicast realm, multicast packets are traditionally UDP, meaning that they do not care if they made it or not. Okay? Remember from networking conversations before, and maybe you're new to the show. Welcome to the show, by the way. Remember from conversations before, traditionally, TCP is a handshake. It's the packet gets sent out, and the receiver receives the TCP and sends back a response and says, I got that one, send the next one. And it's happening at lightning speed. UDP is basically me throwing the packet over a wall and saying, hope somebody's over there to catch it. But the reason why UDP shines with multicast is because the network is there to make sure that the subscriptions are correct. It also, by the way, enables the leverage of it. It uses the processing power and leverages the sophistication of a well-orchestrated network to get the packet from encoder to destination effectively, on time, intact, in sequence. That's really important, but without any sort of degradation to the actual packet itself. And so it's up to the network to make sure that subscribed multicast stream is done correctly, efficiently. And if it's not, the network can figure out how to route that data better. Okay? So the layer 3 level, which was that PIM level, it can figure out more efficient pathways. Maybe that means it goes through less busy switches on your network. Maybe that means it takes the trunk path instead of the alternative connection, or however it is that you're set up. The actual PIM level, the layer 3, the routing level, will determine the best path forward, and sometimes that's not the shortest. Sometimes it's the fastest, and you would hope that generally it would always be the fastest in this regard. So it's important to understand why the different things are set up the way that they are, because your network in the multicast world will learn the most effective ways to send that data across the network. And then the switches will learn who's requesting and what needs to go where. And if you can get to that level, even in a small, this maybe I shouldn't say this, even in a small network environment, multicast is incredibly efficient. And it means that if you are running multicast, you can expand very quickly and efficiently without losing performance. Your bottleneck will be the actual processing power of your network. And so keep that in mind as you expand your products in a multicast configuration, adding more BirdDog plays, or you're adding more flex outs, and you're putting them in this multicast configuration. The bottleneck will eventually be the ability for the network to process this data. And whether you're going back to a fiber core, maybe the core gets upgraded to a 4300. Okay. If you're going back to a 4250 core and you want to move, I don't know, does the 4350 line have a fiber core model? I don't know. I haven't looked. I'll check it out. But you need to upgrade, be sure that your backplane is upgraded to the level in which that's not going to be a problem. But you will eventually max out. But the beautiful thing about multicast is it's pretty rare that the endpoints are going to be the problem. It's really going to matter, essentially, then, how much your network can handle. Because it's up to the network to process the data and to get it to the subscriptions. So multicast has this beautiful, it's one less factor, right? It's one less, there are bad cables and there are bad ports on switches and whatever, fine. But it's one less factor of, hey, I'm getting inconsistent performance. You can pretty much almost guarantee that you're probably maxing out the network side and not necessarily the ability for the camera to send the streams to multiple destinations. One last thing I'll say about this. When of this kind of like pseudo education side of multicast, when you're in a TCP unicast environment, okay, TCP UDP, the burden of replicating those packets is on the endpoints. So your P4K is operating in 4K level, right? 200 megs, 220 megs per stream. If I subscribe to the P4K 3 times, that's about it. That's all that network card can do consistently. And it probably, I would actually advise less than that, to be honest with you. And a great way to test this is open Studio Monitor twice, because Studio Monitor subscribes to NDI streams twice. I don't know why, but they do. Open Studio Monitor twice on the same camera. You're probably pushing the limits of that network card. But in a multicast environment, it's only 200 megs. That's all the camera's responsible for. Get the information on the network correctly, okay, in order, in sequence. And then it's up to the network to pass that. So a P4K in a multicast environment, theoretically, can go to the end limits of your network's ability and processing power. It's beautiful. It eliminates that problem of the performance of the actual network port on the device itself. Okay, that means that problem is much less likely going to be the issue when you're having performance problems. Okay, that ends that kind of like educational piece. I'm really sorry if that was super confusing or if it was useful at all, but hopefully that gives you a general idea as to why multicast really shines, especially in mid to large size installations. And I'm going to show an example of a 4250 multicast configuration, and then we're going to actually put cameras on that multicast configuration. But I want to bring in BirdDog Jake back to this conversation because he is also running a multicast environment, and he's doing multiple AV requirements on the same VLAN running in multicast. So he's doing Dante, and he's doing full BirdDog NDI as well. So I will re-add him to this conversation, and I've got his
Howdy, John.
Microphone unmuted now. So, hey, what's going on, man?
Perfect.
Thanks for coming back and hanging around.
Thanks for covering all those things. It's really important,
Yeah, the first thing I want to ask you, because I don't normally have is direct feedback like this, is what did I forget? Or what did I miss? Like, what's outstanding that I glazed over?
The only thing that I think that I was looking for was maybe the IGMP querier, right? Because you have your snooper that's finding those devices, and then you have a querier on the network, which you only usually want one, if I remember correctly, right? But no, pretty much those are all the main points in which multicast is required, and those settings that you're going to see on various switch manufacturers.
Yeah. Now, what's really interesting about the AV lines that have that kind of NDI stamp of approval, and again, the major one right now is the 4250, 4300 line, is that they have gone to NDI and they've come to BirdDog and they've gone to some manufacturers and said, like, what is your out-of-the-box settings? So that essentially you can turn on the NDI5 profile, which is already enabled for multicast, and you can turn on multicast on the device, and they start talking multicast packets. Now, you do need to restart the device, by the way, but we'll talk about that when we talk about integration. But you can enable that function, and it starts to work right away.
Exactly. That's
what
why those
multicast
profiles
isn't.
are so fun.
Yeah, what multicast isn't, though, is I go into my BirdDog device that's running on my Unify network or my TP-Link network, and I turn on multicast and I restart the device. That is not multicast. Your network has to be multicast enabled, which means that the last step in the multicast installation is turning it on at the device level, but you need to go through and make sure that your network is even capable of doing multicast.
Yep.
So there's kind of an assumption there that it's like, oh, you do multicast? Okay, I'll turn it on my camera level, and then they don't.
No, you'll want
multicast.
to definitely make sure that you don't do that, because if you do turn on both the transmitter, right, your node, the source to be multicast, and then you turn on your receiver to be multicast without setting up that in between, you're going to run into that flooding ports packets that we went into earlier. Because the network's not going to know where it's supposed to go, and it's going to broadcast that stream everywhere. Yeah,
and packet flooding is a real thing, very much so. Matter of fact, NDI had an issue with packet flooding with their own NDI broadcast back with like NDI 2.5 or 3.0, or I forget what it was, but they were just like, the algorithm was running so often to announce in TCP to like Studio Monitor or whatever.
Yeah.
And so the original SDK, one of the original SDKs, was announcing so often that it was causing packet flooding. And so they just dialed back the algorithm and stopped that issue. Yeah. So anyways, that was long ago and way in the past. And it's so good. Okay, so let's talk briefly then about let's talk about integrating this on our network. So I can put this. Let me open up. First of all, I'm gonna open my 4250 actual switch here, and we can look at the profiles. We can even set up a profile for it, but it's pretty straightforward.
In this AV interface, it gives us a direct option for multicast, and you'll jump into it. But we get to see all our multicast groups and everything that's currently subscribed, the source, as well as that subscriber MAC address that we were talking about.
Right. All right. Let me jump over to. I'm going to put this on the actual StreamYard computer so I can share the screen and we can both be still present on this show. So here we go.
Yeah, I haven't tried presenting through StreamYard directly yet.
Yeah, so if I can add it to stream like this is basically a screen share.
Oh,
and
perfect.
Then, it keeps you all kind of over on the left-hand side, and we can even make it where it's like we're bigger. But I like this one.
No, this makes a lot of sense. This is great.
So this is a switch. This is just kind of a standalone situation where I have one switch that's governing my entire studio. But you can actually use the Engage software, and I haven't. On Tuesday we talked about the announcement of the 4300, but they also updated the Engage software, and they announced that it would be end of June or early July. Mm-hmm. And so in the Engage software, there's actually a way to do this across your entire fleet, which is super helpful. Very cool. In this instance, we want to just walk through how to do this at the switch level. And so traditionally, you would create a brand new VLAN, and you would enable this as whatever profile. So I'm going to actually do that. To do that, we're going to go to actual network profiles, and then it's actually behind this. Why is that hovering over that? Okay.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. That happened on my Switch
Okay.
last night, actually.
Let me see if I can't figure that out. How does that work? All right, well,
I know.
That is an interesting issue. I have yet to.
I think what firmware are you on? I'm just curious because
I'm on the late. I just updated this to the latest.
To 14.
So, all right. Well, let's just create another one. That's fine. Create AV template. Here we go. Oh wait, no, I don't want to create an AV template. I want to create another. How do I get behind this? Boy, this is awkward. Stand by, everybody.
Down below. Hit the gear icon for the new AV NDI VLAN.
Oh, you're right. You're right. Okay, so video for the one that we want to pick in this instance, which is already enabled for multicast. It's enabled for NDI 5, but it's also claims to function with Dante, in which our friend here, Jake, can attest to. So we're going to hit this actual gear. Okay, here we go. And we're going to create our new actual profile. Good catch. So we're going to show this as today it's going to be our test VLAN. And I'm going to name it. Now, this is just me, okay, by the way. I'm going to name it something specific because I like putting the VLAN profile name, the number of the actual VLAN in the name, just so I know when that everything's the same. So if I call this VLAN 65, the ID probably needs to be 65. For funsies, we can change it to whatever color we want, and that's fine. And then in this instance, we are going to set this up as its own, having its own DHCP governance. Okay, so that IP addresses will be issued on its own when we plug into any of these ports that are on NDI 65. So the VLAN IP address. Now this box is if I'm plugged into this VLAN and I need to get to this switch, what do I type in the web? So like up here, see, it's like 192, or you probably can't see that actually. This switch's interface is 192.168.1.60. That's its address on my network. So that's what I'm doing here, but inside this VLAN. So if I say 192.168, and then I'm cheeky like this, and I say 65 because that's my VLAN ID, and that's also the profile name. So this whole network is going to be the 65 network. So the way I do this, and this is totally it's subjective. You can do whatever. You can make it as confusing as you want, but I find this to be fairly easy. So I can say 65.1, or I can make it 254, one or the other, but preferably either the first number or the last number in the line. And when we say that networks have 254 assignable IPs, it's generally because the first one and the last one are reserved for certain functions, and this is one of those functions. So I'm going to make this 192.168.65.1, and I'm going to set my subnet mask at WAC 24 because that's the way I believe NDI should function. This will give me 254 addresses. And then I'm going to turn on the actual DHCP server itself. Now, Jake, if you're waving and trying to get my attention, I can't see you right now. So you just
no, I'm not. No, you're perfect. I'm just nodding along because this is exactly how you set it up. I prefer the 65 octet or the third octet. VLAN ID, and I completely agree.
Well, what's nice about that, and as like a trick from a sustainability and troubleshooting stance, is that if I plug in and my device gets a 65 address, I know I'm on the right VLAN, right?
Right.
So even if I've forgotten which ports are belonging on it and I get a 1 address, it's like, oh, that's my data network. And then I plug it into a different one, I get a 65 address. Okay, I'm on the right. I'm on the right port now. So the default router then is 65.1. And then here it says, where do you want to start that DHCP pool? So where do you want the IP addresses to start being issued? All right. And I don't like leaving it wide open all the way. So I typically start at 10 and then I go to 254.
That's what I do.
You can make this a little less if you want. Yeah. And the nice thing about this is, first of all, it leaves you 9 other addresses that are kind of never to be used. And so if for some reason you need to add a computer and you want to give it a static IP address, you give it 65.2 and you know that address is not being used, right? But I start at 10, and when I plug a device into one of these ports now on this VLAN and it gets 65.11, I know my DHCP is functioning correctly because it issued an address after 10. So there's that little helpful hint as well. And then the DNS services is basically how do we route information outside of this VLAN. I'm not going to go into that on this tutorial, and I didn't on the previous one either. But the DNS servers, you can either point this at
a gateway that's actually on your network on a different subnet, which should give you internet access outside, but we'll talk about routing and all that stuff in a different video. But what I want to draw attention to here is this actual lease time in minutes. Okay, so this is how long do IP leases last when the device stops requesting one. All right, so typically a computer, if you plug it in, it's going to send repeated broadcasts to say, I'm still here, I still need my IP address, don't change it on me. Here's my MAC address. It's going to give out those broadcasts. But primarily what the lease time is about is when I take a computer or a device off of the network, how long does time need to elapse before that address becomes available for somebody else? Okay, so you can make this number whatever you want. Typically, guys will make them at least, a one business day. In this instance, this is, if we have 24 hours, they've basically given you how long, or divided by 60. So where are we here? Let's do some simple math. To 240, that's like what, 3 hours or something like that? So 4 hours. It's a 4-hour lease. You could double this to make it an 8-hour lease, which is your typical business day, right? Or you could make it like 7 days if you want. So you could do 60 minutes times 12 times 7 and put in, and I believe that's 10,800 if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's 1440 per day. So
yeah, there you go, 1440 per day. So you can put in some massive number and hit apply, and it would reserve that. So here's the instances. I go to my church congregation twice a week and plug in my laptop. I want it to have the same IP address issued, most all the time, and for that lease not to expire. And I'm not having big turnover on that network, but some people do come and join and like bring other devices. Well, you could make it a 7-day lease, meaning that it will remember your MAC address and the IP address it assigned you, and will keep that lease available for you in most scenarios for basically a week. And then if you don't show up for 7 days, it'll issue that address to somebody else. That is essentially what the lease time is. The other piece is modern networks will allow this time to elapse, and then will re-broadcast to that device and say, are you still here? Do you still need this address? And if the camera's on, it will say, yep, still here, still at this MAC address, and it will renew the lease. So this doesn't mean that every device that's been on your network for 7 days will get a new IP address. It also doesn't mean that if for some reason you didn't show up within 7 days, you would get a new IP address. It's just saying, if you're having high IP turnover, how long do I need to wait before I'm allowed to issue this IP address to somebody else? So that's traditionally what the lease time is. And then we'd hit apply. Now, on a 4250, you're going to see this little warning. It says, we actually really recommend you at least list one DNS server. But in this instance, we are not talking to the internet on this VLAN. Okay. And then it creates my profile right here. Now, I'm not associated to any ports because I didn't highlight any of them when I did that. But the way you do that is we can go in here and say edit. And we can tag whichever ports we want. So we just put check marks next to them and hit apply. And then it would push those ports onto that VLAN, give it about a minute, and then plug in your first device to it and see if it comes up with a 65 address. That's how you set that up for the NDI5 profile. Now, how does this now coincide with multicast? And this is where I'm going to bring Jake into this conversation a little bit, because our profile is set up. So what do we need to do now to get this to work with to make this a multicast network?
Well, what's fantastic about that AV profile is that Netgear automatically handles that IGMP snooping and querier selection and election, depending on what switches you have. And if you've plugged in multiple switches, as you have, John, and so have I and all of our other customers, you see that we have an auto trunk available as well. So there's a lot of things that the Netgear is doing to assist us and our teams and everyone using our gear, right? Mm-hmm. So the next step, right, because the first step was to get multicast gone.
Right.
Let's start editing our devices.
So yes, so now we want to go over and we want to start adding our devices. Let me pull up a... And
we're going to go from BirdDog source to decoder, right?
Yes. Yeah, we can go to BirdDog source to decoder.
Because there's some conversations to have if we're going to a computer that's receiving those NDI streams and what that means.
Right.
For all the applications like cam control and studio monitor and multi-view and whatnot.
Right. So this is the P200, and I hesitate to use a camera that I'm streaming to in vMix because it could cause all sorts of issues here. Mm-hmm. But this is this P200 camera. Jake will be here to save the day and keep the conversation. This is a P200 camera that I'm using for the actual show. It's a little different angle, P4K, P200. And that is this camera, which is functioning in TCP environment right now. And that's fine. It's interacting with vMix just fine. It appears to be not having too many issues. But I want to switch this over. This camera is plugged into this 1.60 switch that I've been using right here on the that we've been customizing with my new VLAN. Now, a little bit behind the scenes is I've got the whole network functioning on a multicast level as well, and so we're prepared to do this already. But I'm going to go into this this web UI, and first we got to put in our super secret password and get past the actual dashboard. And the way that we do this is we can go over. We want to make sure that all of our settings here are correct. So I've got my local name. I've got my DHCP settings. It's receiving an 81 address. That's great. A 1.81 address. And then down here under the actual network setting, it says preferred transmit method. And from here, I want to change this to multicast. And this is, remember when I said that Netgear has done their due diligence and talked to the NDI world about this profile and made sure that they were aligned with the expectations of networking for multicast? Well, they've actually enabled this to function with these default settings. And these default settings come from the NDI SDK when we talk about multicast. And so these came from NewTek. And then the specs for the actual NDI 5 profile for multicast came from NewTek. So they're all talking the same base language. Now, your IT department may have a different flavor switch, may believe in Cisco only, may believe in various, networking ideas and beliefs.
And importantly, maybe have a specific multicast subnet that is not the default range. So
correct.
If you guys look online and see what the default multicast ranges are, multicast is used not only just for local switch distribution, but for internet protocol, for getting packets all across the world, right? So there are specific addresses that we absolutely cannot use because they're used for other things.
Right.
The default starts at 239.255, so on, so on. So if your IT department says this is the specific subnet that we want these multicast addresses to be on, that's when these start to get changed.
Exactly. That is when you would start changing these if your infrastructure requires it, because you're using specific ones because the other ones are occupied with something else, or like Jake said, there are certain ones that you absolutely cannot use. This is the default stuff. And
it's
so for the 4250
from BirdDog, from
exactly
everything makes it super easy to get up and running.
Yes, super simple. So we can change it to multicast, but I'm still actually running in TCP. And as many of you know, when you hit apply and then we go to the dashboard, we probably need to restart this device to get it functioning correctly in the now it's going to change its network mode without doing it, but I strongly recommend that you at least reboot the NDI chip to do this. And so my video just froze in vMix. Glad that it didn't dump vMix. But video frozen vMix, restarting, device mode is now in code, and check this out. Network mode changed to multicast. Awesome. Now, I am now streaming again. My 200 is now streaming on this network again, so that feed has come back and is live. And the report is that my computer is functioning, or I'm sorry, that the P200 is functioning in multicast. All right, now, the question might be, okay, great. How do we verify that? Well, you can do that in Wireshark, and I have a video on my BirdDog John page that talks about Wireshark. I don't know if I chopped it up into a keynote or not, but maybe I'll do that next week. You can actually run Wireshark and see the multicast packets coming out of 192.168.1.81, which is what this camera is. And the easiest way to do it is run Wireshark and open Studio Monitor, subscribe to the stream from the camera, and then run Wireshark, and you will see that traffic moving across the multicast IP ranges. Okay, that's how you know. And the packets will be listed as UDP. So UDP, and you'll see, let me jump back here, sorry. You will see the, network. You will see an address that looks something similar to this, okay, being issued to the camera. And that subscription will be, you'll see those packets moving. That's how you know that you're outputting multicast packets onto your network and that somebody is subscribed to it correctly. Okay, so we've got our
about
camera.
That subscriber quickly, right? So pulling it into your vMix, right? So your vMix in Access Manager. So this is where those computer devices come into play. Until that NDI receiver decides to pull that multicast subscription, that P200 is going to be doing a unicast stream to it,
Right?
Because the receiver didn't request to receive it on its multicast stream. So that's one thing to triple make sure that when you're doing any software NDI applications is that NDI Access Manager multicast is enabled.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, good point. And I have that over on.
Yep.
I've got a PC on this side and a Mac on this side. I'm running the
Nice.
show off the Mac and like sharing. Anyway, so yes.
No, totally.
So
So that's something definitely to make sure if we're going to be jumping into software NDI applications. But in either case, you can see those multicast subscriptions inside the Netgear M4250.
Right. Okay, hang on here. Let me. Okay, I've opened Access Manager just so we can kind of talk a little bit about this.
Yeah.
Jake, you'll still be on here. I'll make myself full screen so I can show.
Sure.
Sorry, too many. I got too many options here. Okay, this one and this one. Okay, so if we jump over to my screen share here, and this is the actual Access Manager stuff. So you're saying, well, what are you talking about? You have to enable it in Access Manager.
So we go over to the Advanced tab, and then there's a multicast drop down, and looks like you already had it enabled, right?
Yep.
So
you would check this. This box would be unchecked by default for Access Manager. So you would enable it and it'll say like, hey, please know what you're doing here, and please talk to us if you don't. And then you'd enable it. And check this out. The defaults are already filled in here as well.
Exactly.
As again, so unless you're instructed by your IT department to change these, this would be the defaults that are set across the fleet.
Something to note, guys, if you're using Access Manager on a Mac, they unfortunately do not pre-populate the default values in there. And
oh, interesting.
Actually, John, I found a bug in yours right now. And I think this was an old, this was a NDI bug. Inside Access Manager, your subnet mask and your subnet are switched.
They're swapped. Yeah, they are. You're right.
Yep. So let's make sure we change that.
Yeah, this is 5.5.0.0, I think.
Yes, that was the one that it was was switched.
Okay, so everybody update your NDI tools so that you don't have that issue.
Yes. Okay, so let's actually make a note about that right now, because I know that there are a lot of locations that have older NDI tools installed that can't obviously upgrade just because there's a new bug fixes that come out or whatever it is. So please, if you guys are not updating and going to be looking at multicast for software applications, look at NDI Access Manager and make that sure that that's correct.
Yeah. I think that is true. So I opened Access Manager on a Mac, and it's also true.
Or is it
swapped?
Flipped? Oh, is it really?
On what version is this? Oh, good catch, man.
Because I tested it on my new M2, an Air,
this is
and
version
it
2.0.
wasn't even listed.
It didn't even fill it in.
Yeah.
Interesting. They are swapped on this one too, so that may just be a programming oopsie when they were doing an update.
Yep.
Okay, good catch. So if you're wanting, yes, okay, great catch. Great note too. So if you're running Wireshark and you're wanting to see the multicast packets coming across to Studio Monitor, you definitely need to have that enabled inside of Access Manager. And remember, when you check the box and you fix the form, you have to hit OK in order to apply those changes to the NDI library that are stored. The changes don't take effect until you basically close Access Manager. But what it does is it's changing the NDI libraries.
And the program that's being used.
Exactly.
So if Studio Monitor is open while you make that change to Access Manager, you have to close down NDI Studio Monitor and open it back up.
Yes.
I personally like resetting my computer. So that way, because I have screen capture that starts up, I have all my BirdDog devices and any NDI streams that automatically boot up at the start of the computer. We want to make sure that those are also in Multicast.
Yeah.
Hello, IT. Have you tried turning it off and on again?
It's kind of a joke, but
that's the one.
We do recommend turning it off and on again quite often. So it's anyways. It's one of those.
You'd be surprised how much that helps.
How much it solves. Yes. Okay. So then you can. So now we can see that the multicast packets are coming across. We can do this in Wireshark. So now we got to get this to a decoder. So I'm going to open up. I'm going to share another screen here. I've got my BirdDog Play, which is running my Multiviewer Pro output for all of my cameras here in the show. Now, you're not going to be able to see that, but you will be able to see the interface for this BirdDog Play. So right now we're running this play. It's set in TCP. It's working just fine. I can see everything in my on all of my cameras so far, which is great. So let me jump over there. And again, here we're going to log in. I've actually already logged in, and we're going to go over back to the network. So same situation here. I'm running this in DHCP. It's been given an address. The BirdDog Play shows me the address when it boots up, which is super handy. And, my MDNS, my short name for the actual product. But here we go, back to NDI network settings. We have the actual TCP option that's selected, so we can do this in multicast. Now, you'll notice there's no multicast settings to change here. Jake, do you know why that is?
No. Let me check my play.
So I think that this is just because it is only subscribing to the so the configuration side happens at the encoder and the network level, but it doesn't happen at the decode level. So it's just subscribing to multicast streams.
Yes, you're 100% correct.
Yeah, it's not generated.
The preferred receive method for multicast is only putting itself as a multicast subscriber on that address, so you don't need to specify which subnet prefix and mask it is, because it's going to be going through the network to find that device and then have that subscription.
Yeah, exactly right. So we, as Jake says, we always we like to turn things off and back on again. So I've changed it to multicast. I've hit restart. It is rebooting right above my camera. Let it come back, actually start functioning, and then we can actually refresh this page. Let me see if it actually changed. Yes, it did. Okay, and we're listed here. Now, give the dashboard a few seconds to update. I get impatient, so I don't do that. But we are functioning now in multicast. And again, great to reboot the device. Great to so remember what we said. Device restart is NDI chip reboot. And then system reboot is actually starting the whole boot up process all over again. And that's the same for all of our products across the fleet. And then pulling the power on it is a full-on power cycle. Okay, so there are three different things. You can do an NDI chip reboot. You can do a baseboard reboot, which reboots the baseboard and the chip. Or you can do a power cycle by pulling the power on the device and plugging it back in.
We give you all the options.
Yes, exactly. And now the decoder is running in multicast. My encoder, my camera, or whatever is running in multicast. My computer's able to see this stuff, and we could actually use Wireshark to see if the data is being sent over. You could snoop it if you wanted to, but see if the data is being sent to the play as multicast with multicast addresses. But that is basically confirmed in this instance. And on a 4250, I mean, we've been chatting for an hour, but that took a whole lot less time, and with explanation, by the way, than it would if you were building this from the ground up. And so beautifully, Netgear has taken care of a lot of that work that you have to do to get multicast functional, and you could watch a YouTube video like this one, for example, and pretty much figure it out for yourself if you're running the AV line from Netgear. So, I can't speak highly enough of them. And I'll even give them a secondary shout out that if you do have questions, they have a dedicated email for people who are running.
I was talking to them yesterday. I needed their
AV
assistance.
over IP. Yep, this is from my experience, they're very responsive to this email address, and so they're becoming very, very popular in the AV realm. And with the introduction of the 4350s, that is equally as exciting. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay, let's officially kind of wrap up the how-to function of Multicast and how to get that going, and also a little education piece. We will get back to the chat. Jake will hang around as long as he can. We'll answer any questions, and then as a sidebar, we can talk a little bit about Dante running parallel with Multicast kind of post-recording. So
yeah.
Let's do that next. Let's jump back to the chat, and let's do that next. All right, recording is off, and let me just see what we missed over here. So we're all on modern Cisco, these catalysts. We're all on modern Cisco switching gear from the past 5 years at most. Multicast is so good. Is Multicast usually UDP or TCP, which we answered? Is the bottleneck not how many encoders you add in Multicast and not the amount of decoders? So maybe I wasn't super clear, but basically it answers the question. Yeah, it answers the question. It's one stream for all subscriptions. Okay, so instead of it compiling 140 megs at HD full NDI on top of each other, it's just 140 megs for whoever wants to subscribe to it. It doesn't continue to add up.
It simplifies the onboarding onto the network, right? So we use our networking tools and their CPU and the whole switch to handle that distribution.
Right.
So it does depend on how many, like if you want to plug all 24 plays into a switch, right? You got to make sure that switch has enough power and juice to handle those streams going to all of it. But it would just be one source going up.
It is interesting, too, because people do look at marketing material and they see, like, oh, it's got 24 gig throughput.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
That is the wrong way to read that information. You really need to look at, like, the quality of the silicone and what can it actually process all the time.
And actually look at the CPU cycles of that switch. Because I know when I was doing NVX Crestron Multicast installs, we were setting up the switches from scratch because there was no Netgear AV line at the time. Depending on how many multicast receivers we had online, that CPU cycle would go up, and the RAM would be used in that switch. So we had to essentially benchmark our own switches to say how many actually multicast streams can this handle before we need to add a fiber core, before we need to add a heavier duty switch into the scenario.
Well, what's really neat is that things like the 4250 fiber core, which I got to briefly play with at NAB in 22, it's a 10 gig like all the way through. It's like every port has SFP plus, and it's like this super beefy switch. So when I was plugging in 1 gig SFPs into this, it would scale down to 1 gig, but I knew there was no way I was going to exhaust this backplane because I was running home runs all back to a fiber core. So the theory was, which I thought was beautiful, and I don't know, some people thought it was over complex. We were doing.
I thought it was great.
But we were doing.
It made a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, we were doing a single hop, right, or 2 hops technically, but we were going out of the switch, fiber to the core, from the core to the destination. That's the only traffic for every switch on the network. That was the traffic.
I mean, that's how it would be set up in corporate environments with multiple buildings and things like that. And that's what we were doing at the show. We had each little station to give off our examples of everything that we had going on.
And that was early in the NDI profile days. Like that was NDI 4 profile on all of those.
Right.
But man, diagnostics, like we had just launched NDI 5 we had just launched, we were showing P110?
Yeah, P110 and 120s.
On NDI 5. And we were having just some like little issues or whatever, and the engineers were like, we don't know if it's network related, we don't know if it's software related, and I was able to basically prove it wasn't my network. I was so proud of myself because the Netgear guys have been like, oh, if you're having that issue, you run these commands and look in these places, and I was able to go through and look, and I was like, oh, sweet, like the switch says it's processing everything it's being handed, and I knew that was the case because it was this monstrosity, but for redundancy's sake, you might consider running. Okay, so now let's just play with money. If it were me, every one of these switches has an SFP plus or an SFP port on it. I would do dual fiber cores and run one of them to each, and then cross those, do a trunk between those two fiber cores. So basically they would essentially be stacked, but they would talk together as if they were one, but each switch would go back to a different core, which would then be bridged together, and then you could basically have redundancy. So you could have anything die. You could have an SFP die, you could have a mod die, you could have one of the cores die, and nothing would stop working.
Amazing.
It was so fun.
That's a great setup.
But anyways, if sky's the limits with money. So it's like tickles my creative brain.
Mission critical networking design is something that our clients and customers use on a daily basis, right?
Yep.
So there are event spaces and town hall meetings and corporate facilities and educational facilities and financials and I mean, we all know how far and wide NDI is being distributed, and it's in some really amazing spaces. So
yeah, well, and again, it goes down to the conversation of like, how critical are you? And it's like, well, we can't be down. It's like, okay, well then the network is the king here. Like the cameras are going to continue to work. Okay, they're going to do their job. But if you have a crappy network and that switch dies, and that means you can't make your money. Right. Well, guess what? Like the network is way more.
There are even redundancies to that camera level. So like, take your whole setup you have, and you put a second camera next to it, and God forbid something goes wrong with the camera, you have another one that you can cut to in your production, right?
Well, and for a lot of people,
all build on redundancy.
Yeah, a secondary shot, like you could switch to a secondary shot like this, which is very similar, but it's in a different location than the P4K. But have a secondary redundant shot that's not as expensive, $200, over my $8,000 camera. And then if the P4K dies, we switch to that one.
That's where you use the NDI failover.
And that's where you have the tally light. So the tally switches, and the talent knows, oh, now I'm talking to this camera. If they're like versed enough in how this goes, I'm talking to this camera. The technician comes around, pulls the 4K out, puts the replacement camera in, fires it up, and then when the tally switches back to the main shot, we know, oh, now I'm live over here. Yeah. So, yes, there are ways to make this work. I mean, you could do dual cameras that run parallel, but you could even, if your budget isn't that flush, you could do a backup camera that sits cold and is configured correctly and already in your vMix system. When it powers on, it shows up in the list. But, like, we don't use that unless something dies.
Yep.
And then you can even cycle it into degrade with, like over time as things get used, they degrade, technology degrades. So you could like swap it out, and then this one's the backup camera or whatever. So there are ways to do it where that level of where your risk management is mitigated but is conscious of the budget essentially. Anyway, so there's lots of things to talk about there. So we're hitting a chord with some people because people are saying great info once again. Ooh. What's going on, Albert? Good to see you.
Thanks,
and
Albert.
Great informative show. Thanks, John and Jake. See, it is the quality of the content always elevates when I have Jake on the show, so that's why he keeps getting invited back. Is Studio Monitor
I just poked my hand around so many things.
Well, you've had time to play with it too, which is really what we're all doing over here too. Are we pulling the proxy and the full video stream at the same time? So I had said, for some reason, Studio Monitor pulls the stream twice. If you watch the network monitor, at least it was the last I checked, it shows a double value, meaning 280. It is pulling a proxy stream, but it seems to only add that to the network requirements when you look at it.
Yes.
Which is how NDI is supposed to be. So if I connect a BirdDog camera to my network, but nobody's subscribed to that stream, it's not adding 140 megs to the burden of the network. It's only added when I look at it.
Yep.
Now, for some reason in Studio Monitor, again, this may be fixed, by the way. This could be fixed. But for some reason in the past, in Studio Monitor, if you look at it, it pulls 280 for some reason. And I don't know why. But that's a quick way to burden your cameras. I'll put it that way because you're subscribing to it dual. Now, again,
something I found interesting in Studio Monitor regarding that proxy stream stuff. I don't know if it's on your version, but in my version of Studio Monitor, if you resize the window and make it certain small, it automatically turns on proxy.
Yes.
So I do that with I found that out because Scopes was on, right? So I have Scopes on my preview, And then I shrunk the screen, and then scopes pop up, which confirms to me that it's actually pulling the proxy stream rather than the full stream.
I did notice that because I think I had that exact same thing happen to me. I was monkeying around with it, and
there's like a special size. It's like if it's I guess below, what is it, 640? No, 680 by 480, whatever that resolution is.
Because at that minuscule size, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But yeah, I had the scopes on because I was doing a whole course on scope work. Like I did like 2 or 3 shows on it. And yes, I noticed that when I shrunk down the full NDI, the scopes came on at a certain level. And I was like, wait a minute, what's going on there? And realized, oh, we have proxy turned on for some reason at this size.
Yeah.
I thought that was strange.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool that it does that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good use of resources because it's like, well, you can't see the detail at this tiny size anyway, so you might as well not use the full value of the stream. Yeah, that's a little intuition. Good for you, New Tech NDI. Let me see here. So to answer that first question from Josh, is Studio Monitor pulling the proxy? It is, but it's only when you subscribe to it. It seems to actually pull down that value. I will double check my claim of dual in Task Manager after the show because vMix is running like 6 cameras right now, and so I try not to overload it if I don't have to with Studio Monitor. IGMP snooping and a querier is like turning on a Discovery server. It quiets down all the packets and makes a single device manage the list of streams. Accurate, NetHub. Great summary of the long-winded thing I was trying to say. Hey, thanks for this. Great, so great. I use my camera's redundancy all the time given vibration of walls at concerts, etc.
Perfect.
Yep, that's a good example. We have that issue. We have a camera mounted on a table, and if somebody hits the table, it shakes the whole thing. And so it's handy to have a redundant camera shot or like the door shuts and it shakes the whole wall, and you can switch real quick to something else so it gets that. I mean, it's structural. There are things that like you just can't get around, right? So the way the building is built or the way the HVAC kicks on and shakes the walls, that's unfortunately just what that is. 640 and lower is proxy resolution. Is this official?
Yeah, that should be correct. Yeah, 640 and lower should be proxy.
Gotcha. I will also advocate, everybody, if I have my heat map still up and running. That's what that little QR code is there above Jake. Looks like this.
What do you got?
It's filling out.
Awesome.
Looking good.
I got a dot up there.
Nice. Where are you located these days? Where are you operating out
I'm
right now?
in Monterey, California. So
Monterey, California.
On that West Coast dot.
Right on. Yeah, that's a good little heap. I love this because
it's so cool. That was so awesome that you added this. It's great.
It's such a nerd. It's so like unofficial too because it's all just Google Sheets. It's all this is. But I figured out how to like reset it every show so I don't have to make new ones, which means the QR code never changes.
Cool.
And I can just turn it off when I'm not online and then turn it on before the show starts and people can check in. But I love it because it kind of gives me an idea as to like the reach of BirdDog and people that are like doing things right now but are involved in the community and stuff too. So it's super helpful that we have things like that. I love it. And I have it as a screen capture inside of vMix, so I can just jump to it whenever
perfect.
I want to.
There we go. That's amazing.
Yeah. Easy peasy. TriCaster will use the same trick where if you have an input on a DSK and it's scaled down, you'll use the proxy screen versus the full bandwidth. Well, that's the little trickery of TriCaster,
that's why
right?
we
Is
love
you can
TriCaster.
have 16 NDI sources, but it only pulls the value of one of them, and it's beautiful.
Yep.
I mean, there's really no contest when it comes to NDI switching against the TriCaster. There are nice things. There are other options in the world. vMix, Wirecast. There is OBS and Streamlabs, but anyways, and a few other competitors out there. But like if you're talking about, I want to do a broadcast level production all running NDI across a sophisticated 4250, 4350 network, man, and like you have a budget, you have a good budget, I cannot point you to a better video switcher than a TriCaster. So
it's that or the VizRT instances.
Yes.
I've been playing around with those a lot lately, and I'm 99% sure that it takes care of the same proxy NDI stream as well.
Oh, nice.
So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Hey, GoWeb says that's me on India.
Hey, GoWeb.
He is over there. He did show up. So I think he's my only guy.
I got to plan a visit over there.
Do it. Yeah, we've had lots of interest in hearing, in having like training done, like in-person training, and a lot of it on the Eastern European and Asia market. And so we're trying to figure out what that looks like. Like it's hard to get the whole team over there that would be relevant for that conversation, but I think it would be hugely beneficial. I think there's some sort of training summit coming up later in the year. So, or something like that here in the States. So we'll see how that works, and if it works well, it may be something we roll out more often. But it's all good. Cool. Well, what else do we need to say, Jake? What have we missed? Is there anything that you need to go? What avenue you need to go down to make the end of this multicast conversation relevant?
Let's see. Well, we covered adjusting it in our devices, both on the sender and the receiver side, right? Again, just to go over, we want to make sure that VLAN is created and that we're on that network that has that multicast enabled. So that way we don't flood our traffic and the rest of the devices on our network.
Right.
We got over how we jump into Access Manager to apply those software sources or software destinations. Specifically, again, let's just talk about workflow and what that entails. BirdDog Multiview, right? So let's have that because it's on the software on the network. Same with cam control, and even Central has an option for enabling multicast transmitters and receivers. So all of these devices are able to then receive those streams once it's on the network, and makes it effortlessly to distribute, right? Because like, let's say you're doing this a TriCaster production and you want to send to BirdDog Multiview because you don't want to use your ME in your TriCaster to make a multiview or something, right? And waste an output. You can now send that stream to a different device on your computer network and create that source for your Pt.3 operators, for your switchers, for your camera and production team. If you have a larger system that you're doing multiple ISO recordings, maybe you have like an SNS Solutions storage device, and that accepts NDI recording. So now that's on the network, having your SNS be your recorder while still simultaneously doing your TriCaster production, while simultaneously creating multi-views, and then simultaneously using Central for distributing to minis and plays and everything. This whole system, all of a sudden you have like 5 or 6 devices that need that single stream. And what do we do there? We use multicast.
Well, and it's fascinating to me though, like, so now that ISO recording of NDI is a thing, right? Like we flirted around with it a little bit for various applications, but I know like Studio Monitor has a record button, whatever, but like there are devices out now that ingest it NDI straight and do ISO recording with that?
They do.
That's
so
thinking awesome.
Okay, so now I got to talk about something really cool.
Go for it.
So let me just talk about BirdDog Cloud really quick. So Cloud is a local instance, right? We have to install BirdDog Cloud on a computer that's on our network, right? So that's going to be a node. BirdDog Cloud has an awesome ability for transcoding media, which is how we send streams from site to site. But what we can also do is we can actually transcode that media, record it locally without even sending it across. So I have a few productions that are using BirdDog Cloud as a recording module to record lower bandwidth MOVs, MP4s, whatever file that you need. Cloud handles the transcode, so we'll use our GPU to take that full bandwidth, 125 to 300 if it's a 4K stream. We'll use our GPU and NVIDIA to convert that down to a 5 to 15 megabit per second stream and have recordings ready to go.
Man, that's crazy.
So I have a few people that are using this as just local recording. So they jump into the BirdDog Cloud website just to manage their locations and their recordings, they're not sending it from site to site. They're just using that as a recording engine. And then from there, you just put a recording directory and set it on your NAS and forget.
But you can centralize the recordings from anywhere in the world. Like basically you can set them up and oh my gosh, okay, yeah. That's cool.
I haven't decided if this is decentralized or centralized, because it's decentralized because it's literally spread out everywhere, but it's a centralized platform which lets you manage all of your. It's really special. There is a new module coming out which lets us record that full bandwidth MOV streams.
Okay.
However, the conversations that's always coming up is, if I'm doing it, what we've been live for 2 hours, and we were recording this, and if you were doing ISOs, this would be maybe like 10 gigabytes per video stream so
massive.
far. Yeah. Right? It'd be ridiculous. You'd have to have that storage space available. So being able to use BirdDog Cloud to record those at 5 megabits.
Yeah.
Add MOV lets my post-production team automatically have access to that video file as growing file support, which lets them edit in Premiere as soon as either production's finished or while it's rolling.
Jeez.
Yeah. So there's an incredible power in NDI, in recording, in multicast, and all this stuff that comes up. So.
Yeah, I guess that's one thing now that I'm thinking through our objectives here for this show that we didn't necessarily touch on was your thoughts on the Dante running parallel on the NDI5 profile, the Dante protocol in multicast over the NDI multicast stuff, and is there any customization that's required for the multicast level to make both of them work together?
No. So my system right now, I have my Dante and NDI switches separate right now. They're on the same VLAN, but they're separate. So I have one M4250 that's handling all my Dante, and I have one M4250 that's handling my NDI BirdDog cameras and stuff. Okay. They were combined. That's why I had to get another switch, right?
Right.
It's because I had too many sources, and then I figured, let me separate them. On one switch, I'm using the NDI profile, right, for all of our stuff. Yep. On the other switch, my Dante one, I'm using the Dante profile. I've gone back and forth. I've used both of them. That's just kind of where I settled after deciding to not mess with it anymore.
Right.
But something that is really important that we need to talk about, and it has nothing to do with multicast, but it has to do with flow control. So our buddies at Netgear, Richard, frequent user on their and our Facebook groups, right, posted a picture or a little Excel sheet of what happens when you're doing NDI video and Dante on the same network,
right,
and what to do with flow control depending on the protocol that you're using, right?
Now, just to back up a little bit, flow control is required for Dante.
Yes and no, and flow control is kind of an older thing, and it really depends on the network topology. In 90% of the use cases for our customers, this is not something that anyone really needs to deal with.
Yeah.
However, for our integrator teams and our resellers and everybody that is doing custom switch configurations or want to get deeper into the Netgear stuff, this is where this comes up.
Gotcha.
So, I'm going to share this with you so that you have it on your team at some point, and maybe we'll go over this another time and we can you can broadcast that. But essentially, the way that it is with RUDP, right? Mm-hmm. If you have Dante video and Dante audio floating on the same VLAN, flow control can be set to either none. If you'll get good results on NDI video and Dante audio. So that's all checked, right? So no flow control is awesome for that, for RUDP. If we do symmetric, Dante's going to have increased latency, right? It's still a good stream. You're still not getting packet drops. It's just arriving later than it would have initially.
Yeah.
If you set that to asymmetric, that latency's gone, and you have that good for NDI video and Dante audio.
Interesting.
Right. So that's for our UDP, right? So that's on
yeah.
everything has the new NDI5.
Right.
So our converters, the Flexes and the 4K Pros, are not going to be able to be using our UDP, right?
Okay.
For right now, until that gets changed.
Got it. Okay.
Let's go to TCP.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's the same exact thing. So flow control, none, gives you good NDI video and good Dante audio. Symmetric gives you that latency in Dante.
Yep.
Right? Asymmetric is good across the board.
What does the flow control, though, solve? Like, why would you even consider turning it on? Like, what's the symptom or the catalyst that would...
It's more about that distribution to a further switch down the line. It's like, how am I handling like these 20 streams and going further down the network in the switch in that topology.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like I said, most scenarios we have our customers running on 1 or 2 switches, and they're more than fine with what it is, and their defaults are okay. Now,
Gotcha.
Now this is the thing. Let's get into UDP, right? Which is multicast or regular UDP streams, right? If you have that flow control set to none, when you have your NDI as UDP, it's bad. Same with Dante audio. You're going to get dropped frames, you'll get dropped audio packets, latency. They straight up say this is not an okay or a good configuration.
Yep.
Same with asymmetric. It's bad across the board. Right? No NDI video, no Dante audio.
Interesting.
Symmetric is the only option for good Dante audio and NDI video streams if you're on UDP. Now, again, this only determines if you need to have flow control as a part of the system to get to other parts of the network. However, this comes straight from Richard at Netgear. He posted it last night on their forum. I have an old picture from a few months ago where they mentioned this.
Yeah.
I think it would be beneficial for us to put this onto, our document page, right? Our knowledge base, so that way we have this available. And then there's multi-TCP stuff, but that's getting phased out by NDI, and multi-TCP is bad for Dante audio across the board. So I just don't even recommend it if those are merged.
Yeah. That was attempted in 4, right? Like that was kind of one of the big protocol options, but only time.
And I think our friend Josh had a hand in that multi-TCP stuff too.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about that that idea of having TCP across multiple ports is great, but I think that multicast answers that problem, right? Like I think that if you're flirting with whether you need multiple TCP ports or you want to go to multicast, I mean multicast is the thing that will outperform multi-TCP. So that's an interesting thought. There was a Dante. Yeah, there's a Dante question here. I don't want it to get lost in the thing here.
Yeah, what's up?
Morning, John and Jake. I'm in the middle of trying to get Dante virtual sound card properly working on my TriCaster and transmitting program sound to be heard on all of the Studio Technologies intercom devices. It's not working yet. NewTek wants to charge me to get help to get it set up, while Audinate and I are exchanging emails trying to get it to working. A YouTube video by NewTek was kind of confusing. Can't figure out how to get the best help to get this set up.
Happy to help you out there. So essentially, we need to make sure DVS is installed on that computer, right? And then when we open it up, we select the network card that's going to be used to transmit those streams. If you don't plug in an Ethernet dongle, you select the network that you have on the TriCaster. You need to go back into the main windows of TriCaster to confirm that your audio output devices are set to the Dante Virtual Sound Card. So from there, those streams will show up in Dante Controller, and then you subscribe it through Dante Controller, which source is going to which Studio Technologies.
Yep. Cool.
Send us an email.
Yeah.
It's hello at BirdDog.tv. I could show you some screenshots.
Yeah, if you address it right to Jake, then whoever's sorting those requests will probably ask him for if he wants to handle it. But anyways, yeah, that's great. And I don't know if it's a sequence, like what buttons do I press, but that's pretty clear. So I may even chop that up and put that up on the site as to here's how you do
so
this.
pretty much, exactly. Those Dante Virtual Sound Card makes channels 1 through 16 available on your network, and it's
cool.
really simple once that's up and running.
Awesome. You didn't realize that's what you were going to get today for the price of
No,
admission,
it's okay.
folks. That was a free one.
That's a good
hey,
one.
I got to try this recording in the cloud. Sweet. Could I do that with my TriCaster recording and my NDI studio recording to add more with less work on my Switch?
So less work on the Switch depends, right?
Yeah.
Because we're still pushing content. If you want to do that in Multicast LoRa, then that's one camera streaming up into TriCaster, and the Switch is handling the BirdDog cloud computer that's handling the recording. So that's one stream on and then 2 out. And then scale that for as many cameras that you guys have, right?
Nice.
But yes, also send me an email because I'm more than happy to walk you through what that looks like for BirdDog cloud recording.
Cool. Yeah, we probably should do a show on that.
So speaking of, cloud and recording and tutorials and stuff, I did start recording the entirety of the onboarding process and workflow videos for BirdDog Cloud.
Yay.
So I'm hopeful that stuff can get out maybe by the end of next week if we can get those uploaded to YouTube and whatnot.
Yep.
We're going to go over everything from installing, setting up an account, connecting endpoints together, and then all the incredible workflows in that entire platform.
Awesome. I love it. That has been a long-awaited piece of information that we have to extract from your brain. So
I know.
that'll be great when that hits.
It's going to be great, and they're all little short, 3 to 5 minute clips, so that way they're digestible, and then you can continue on the tutorial series. And
they're not like these 6-hour videos that I keep uploading.
No, of course, no. This is different content.
Over on Facebook, maybe I missed something. Is it still not possible to use Multicast for a vMix NDI output?
From what I'm aware, for you to output an NDI stream via Multicast, it has to have that transmit preferred method set.
Yeah.
Now, I am unaware if the most recent version of vMix is listening to Access Manager for that.
Ooh,
right.
That's a good question.
So, it's all up to whoever is implementing the NDI SDK.
Gotcha. So UDP necessitates the certain flow control, but does it add latency to the Dante even if it's the only way to make it work?
It does not. We get a good check for both NDI video and Dante audio on UDP symmetric.
Got it. Cool. TriCaster Dante is a pain, but selecting ASIO on the virtual sound card made ours work.
Oh, interesting to know, because I have mine set up as WDM, but that makes sense if it's for the TriCaster, because then it can show up as an ASIO source.
Awesome. Cool. And you got an email from MTash.
Awesome.
So, there you go. Awesome. All right. We did make it to the end. Now, wait. Let's throw this little heat map up here real quick so that you can see where everybody's from. So it's pretty cool. Thank you, everybody, for checking in today. It's been, well, I see my Australians are sleeping today. I usually have 2 guys, one guy in Perth and one guy in Queensland or Melbourne that check in. But thankfully, they've been able to turn off the world for a few hours and hopefully get some rest. But yeah, thanks everybody. This is so cool to see where you guys are checking in from and to be able to kind of chat through stuff. And it looks like my friend from Johannesburg has even made it to the show, so that's exciting.
No fun.
But Jake, man, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's always a pleasure, man, and it's always well worth our time to chat through things, and it helps me not miss a whole bunch of stuff that's probably critical to the conversation. So
it's a pleasure being here. I love being on the show. and talking
Awesome.
with
I
everybody.
appreciate it. So we definitely need to do some more, especially when those videos hit the fan and we start seeing, stats on what people are finding interesting and useful. Then we can start showing stuff live with you through this as well. So
More than happy to.
Interested in that as time goes along.
Awesome.
So yeah, if you need to get a hold of Jake or anything like that, his email is hello@birddog.tv. He is technically still on the sales team, but he's doing 6 different things right now. So he's a busy guy, but he is one of the guys that hangs out at this email address. So if you'd like to chat with Jake, you can reach him there. And of course, me and my team here over at help@birddog.tv, we can always give you a hand with whatever is going on. So really appreciate you guys hanging out with us today. Jake, I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much. I'll let you go and get on with whatever your day looks like over there in California.
All right. Thanks, John.
And we'll catch you next time.
Catch you next time. Happy producing, everyone.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks. All right, and we are going to wrap it up. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. I really appreciate you guys coming along for the ride. I don't know what that video is going to look like and how long it's going to go with the multicast stuff, but I will attempt to get it up and available, kind of rendered and cut up so that you guys can reference that when you need to when we talk about multicast. And if you're ever thinking about going towards a multicast setup, it's once it's up and running, it's really great. Like, it's super stable and it's a great way to design a network. It does take some knowledge, and it is kind of one of those things that's not, people don't willingly show you how to do it very quickly. So it's helpful to have discussions like this, and hopefully you've gained some sort of a level of understanding as to why you might consider doing something like that. Hey, Hot Shoe, hopefully you're doing well. Thanks for the thumbs up. So yeah, hopefully you have found today beneficial on the at least the surface level of the discussion about multicast, and we can certainly help you out with any sort of questions that you might have over at hello or help@birddog.tv. That is where we can be found. So really appreciate you guys. It has been a whole lot of fun hanging out and getting to chat with you. I am going to get after it here. I'm actually out tomorrow for a day, but then back on Monday. We are closed on Tuesday. So next week we have I'm going to try and do a pre-recorded show on Monday and see how that goes with StreamYard. And so there will still be a show, but it's July 4th, which is a holiday here in the U.S. And so we will be... it won't be the same format next week. I may just cancel it, or maybe I'll do a show on Monday. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, maybe I should just push the show till Monday. Anyways, more on that next week. I'll try and announce something earlier on so that you know what's going on. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves. Hey, Laura, always a pleasure. Thank you for being with us. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. Look after yourselves and each other. Take care of those around you, and continue to do great things with those BirdDog products that you have. Feel free to reach out to us if you ever have any questions, anything like that. And I will see you next week at some point back on the BirdDog Live Support Show right here, birddogjohn.tv. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you soon. Really appreciate you. Thanks a lot. Bye, guys.
have spoken. Perhaps you think you're being treated unfairly?